If you've ever wondered why you give and give and give in relationships and still feel empty, this chapter explains it. Some people don't run out of love easily, they become camels. And camels can survive on very little for a very long time until they can't anymore. Quick note, this is for reflection and education, not therapy or medical advice. Chapter 11. Empty love cups produce relationship camels. The effect of a rock-filled, crud-filled love cup with a hole in the bottom, that is, the effect of someone possessing the deepest beliefs that they aren't wanted, aren't good enough, and/or don't matter, is that all life is impacted, most especially relationships. Life becomes much, much heavier, and that bleeds everything. One of the most common problems I see in clients is massively bankrupt relationships and marriages. You know how a camel can go a long time across the desert without water? Well, many years ago, after a few eye opening relationships, I realized that I had become what I now call a relationship camel. A relationship camel does everything in his or her power to make the other person happy. Relationship camels excel at pleasing others, waiting on them, anticipating their needs, and giving and giving and giving. The underlying thinking goes, oh, I'll give you everything you want. Here, let me get that for you. Let me do this for you. Don't worry about me. I can take it. Just let me do these things just for you. Just give me a little bit of love in return. Just as a camel can go a long distance without water, a relationship camel can go long distances on little bit of love or almost no love at all. See, what the relationship camel is doing is fundamentally purchasing love and at a very high price. The relationship camel is so used to not getting love or only used to getting small amounts that when he or she finds someone who gives a little, she gives up everything and all concerns to win a breadcrumb more. In fact, this type of person is often found with someone who, because of their upbringing and core beliefs, gives far less love. People who are big takers of love are often givers of very little, and big givers are often small takers. Hence, a perfect, if ill-begotten fit. Further, it is a situation quite familiar to the relationship camel, as old as his or her childhood, where all of this was learned in the first place. But here's the wacky part. A relationship camel also often falls in with a taker, simply because the camel doesn't know what to do with someone who gives a lot of love. As much as she may long for a giver, a relationship camel becomes discombobulated when she is not the main giver. She doesn't know what to do or how to act. She fears that if she stops or even slows, she won't be loved. Even more screwy, a relationship camel tends to not trust someone who gives too much, or what seems like too much, based on what she thinks she deserves. With people who believe, at their core, that they don't matter or aren't good enough, the more love their mate shows, the less she trusts him. In other words, if a relationship camel finds herself in a personal or professional relationship with someone who gives a lot, the camel, male or female, tends to not believe the other person is telling the truth. Big givers are untrustworthy to the camel because they go against the camel's inner self belief. Chew on that one for a minute. Even if the camel, let's say it's a woman in this case, is thought to be wonderful by her mate, she, the camel, not only won't believe his words, she won't believe him to be a credible person. For the words coming out of his mouth go against the truth of her spirit, her own self belief, that she's no good or doesn't matter. He may be giving her the very salvation she's been seeking her whole life, sincere words and actions of love and adoration. But she won't trust him, not because he's not a credible person, but because she perceives him to be non credible, because he speaks a truth that goes against her deepest beliefs of self loathing and self abnegation. Or, even still more odd, she'll see him as flawed or look down on him for loving her. Many women think, what must be wrong with him if he likes me? Her own distrust of him, based on nothing about him, effectively undermines the relationship. When we don't trust, we don't open up. We hide behind walls and don't reveal who we really are. She's convinced that if he knew the real her, he'd leave. So her distrust of him causes her to pull back, which again insidiously chips away at the relationship because he is not receiving the real her. If he is bonding with her, it is a false version of her or only a surface version of her. And no people can truly bond if they don't reveal their truest selves. So eventually he does, in fact, pull back and or leave. Her prophecy is fulfilled. She creates the very eventualities she sought so astuciously to avoid. The fear kept her behind her walls, and the walls are what kept him from ever being able to truly know her and love her. And so he quit, just as she predicted and enacted. In other words, her own negative self belief is the cause of the destruction of the relationship. A female client will say she wants more than anything to be loved for who she really is. To this her lover responds, "How can I love you for who you really are if you don't show me who you really are?" That's why relationship camels prefer people who are takers, who only give a little bit of love, because they quite ironically feel they can trust such a person more. The words and actions of a taker and the underlying message on which they are based are familiar and therefore easy and consistent with what she's always heard and believed. They're safe, and so a camel keeps picking takers because the taker's message are reflected of her own beliefs and what she has been taught since young. She keeps allowing it. The big lie she was taught, "you don't matter," and or "you're no good," and or "you're not wanted," drives her life and manifests more pain in the form of unhealthy relationships. And so the camel will go on purchasing love, giving a big chunk of themselves for a little bit of the prized love in return. But worse, the camel is forever making her happiness to measure it upon someone else's happiness. If for no other reason, then the taker generally only gives love to the camel when he's happy. I mean, how many takers do you know that actually give love when they're unhappy? Taker implicitly means not giver. So the camel is forever looped into, susceptible to, and almost entirely driven by the feelings of others, especially those closest to her, who demand she keep pouring love into their whole poked love cup. And those relationships only end when the camel realizes she's pouring love into a person who's never fills up with the love that she gives. For the love is gone as quickly as she gives it. So the relationship camel basically lives in a world defined by happiness by proxy. If you're happy, then I'm happy. Or I'm only happy when the people around me are happy. In other words, there's only the loosest correlation between how much I invest in life and how much happiness I have, rather than I am in control of my own happiness. Because it is dependent on an intermediary, my mate or boss or parent or son or daughter, who has to be made happy first, or whose happiness is the very definition of my own happiness. How messed up is that? Yet you keep choosing that, keep choosing to live that. Granted, it's your choice at this point, now that you see what the source is, but you really gotta wonder about the logic of choosing to live this way. Forever strung out on whatever the people around you are feeling, utterly incapable of even fantasizing about what it must be like to feel your own feelings, instead of being weighed down by everyone else's. Rather than a much more direct correlation between my investment in life and my happiness, rather than invest directly of myself into myself by choosing the people, places, plans, and paths that make me happy, that give love and life and energy back to me in big helpings. If I am a relationship camel, I invest in others with only the slightest hope that they will give me some love in return, because I can go long distances on only a little bit of love. Rather than invest my love directly into the paths of my own happiness, I invest my love near completely into others, hoping to get some of the runoff at some point. Among my Wall Street clients, this sort of relationship stock or fund investment, high cost, low payoff, would be considered a terrifically bad investment, to be aborted or shorted immediately. And yet, a great many people in their personal relationships will continue to pour good money after bad, or good energy after bad, as it were, investing and investing and investing in people who have already established through a long pattern of behavior that they have zero interest in offering any sort of return on investment. Yet, of course, the problem is not the other person. The problem is not that the taker is doing this to you. The real problem is that you are allowing it. What does it say about you that you'd allow someone to treat you this way? What are you saying about you by allowing this? The root is always found deepest inside the camel, him or herself, particularly in her belief that this is all she deserves, as well as her inability to both conceive and create a belief system and a concomitant life that are anything different. When a relationship camel breaks up, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit as I hit on more relationship and marriage stuff later in the book, specifically how to know if and when it's time to break up. However, it's salient at this early stage in the book to understand both who the relationship camel is and how she or he thinks both in and out of the relationship. Doing so sets up a more complete understanding of the love cup and the three binary gates, providing something to ping off of. So for now, suffice it to say that the point does come when a relationship camel says she wants a divorce or a breakup. It comes from pouring love, attention, and energy into someone else's punctured cup and from having no love pool inside of herself. But she experiences it as a deadness, emptiness, numbness, exhaustion, depression, and lack. And eventually the deadness and pain becomes so great that she has no choice but to leave. But now, here's the really kooky part. At this point of the pulling away from her spouse, things seemingly change very quickly in her partner, but the results are deceptive and therefore confusing to the camel. This leads to bad decisions and more pain, whether because she is simply exhausted from too much giving or because she has actually begun the process of changing her self beliefs. If a camel begins to end a relationship, the relationship camel's mate often becomes a prince, sends flowers, wants to be with her, and in short, becomes the person she's always wanted him to be. This is the confusing part because it can be powerfully intoxicating, at least for a while. But it is a deception, whether intentional or unintentional. For the camel's mate hasn't solved the real problem driving his initial taking and indifference, the indifference that led the camel to break up in the first place. There has been no change in the taker's core beliefs or three binary gates that drive the behavior. He has only changed his surface behaviors. This is a glowing testament to the power of core beliefs, as well as the truism that is trying to change behaviors never changes behaviors long term. Core beliefs must change. Otherwise, the flowers, softness, kind words, and giving of attention peter out. Eventually, he will revert back to his old ways, as sure as the sun rises in the east. More often than not, this reversion comes only after months or sometimes weeks. Nothing has changed deep inside, so the behavior simply cannot last. In the end, the pretty veneer rubs off, and you realize that any last ditch efforts by your mate are simply too little, too late, and but a chimera. I would fear he whipped up some action, and it dissipates at the point he realizes that either she's not going back to her old giving ways, or he's sick of giving so much. I have a dear friend whom I play violin with and was in an orchestra with from first to eighth grades. This friend, Hokan, has owned his own company with his now ex-wife since his early 20s. He has factories in China and the US, splitting his time between the two, and eventually fell in love with a woman and started a family in China. After 25 years of doing business in China, and particularly after getting to know his Chinese wife's peasant rural family, Hokan says that the leaders of China have a fascinating understanding of their own peasant people, most of whom live a very poor existence, much like that of his in laws. Hokan explained it to me over a Skype session.
In rural China, a great many peasants may get only one loaf of bread per week from the government. The communist leaders are savvy and realize that they don't have to promise these peasants a big house and a middle-class existence in suburbs to keep them happy in their squalor. There is no point in investing that much or even falsely offering that much. It's unnecessary. The peasant is incapable of even conceiving of such an existence. No, all the leaders have to promise is a second loaf of bread per week, and those peasants will think that they've hit the jackpot. They've just doubled their earnings.
This peasant mentality is precisely the pitfall of the relationship camel when it comes to breakups or time to divorce. Having lived in a relationship poverty for so long, the camel is susceptible to being sucked back in by two by a two loaf mentality, by a mere double return on profits, as if that's some sort of victory. Whether the camel's mate realizes it or not, precious little is required to lure the camel back. Highly unlikely the mate is consciously aware of it. More likely, the mate is simply just wants to continue to invest as little as possible to get immediate returns. Think about it. How long can the mate sustain such a high love output when he too has an empty love cup? So soothing is that the balm of a second loaf, whether in the form of flowers, notes, touch, kind words, attention, or just plain time together. Someone actually wants to be with me? That it can lead to a massive distortion of reality. It engenders the false belief that life is tolerably better now and that this can actually last, not to mention the naive belief that this is actually even a distant relative of happiness. Bad, bad, bad. Life is not markedly better now, and it certainly won't last. It can't. Yet sometimes that is what it takes before we are fully 100% ready to leave a relationship. Sometimes we have to get the strength and the self-love to leave, see the effects of my change on my partner, get sucked in, and then get sucked back down before we have the real lasting aha moment that nothing has changed and ain't nothing ever gonna change. Sometimes we have to get lured back by the attention and shiny things and grand lies of leaves seemingly turned. Sometimes our growth requires getting sucked back down when in a position of growing inner strength before we see things with keener eyes, see the changes as illusions, and make decisions more lastingly. In the end, however, the plight of relationship camel in a marriage, intimate relationship, or divorce is almost irrelevant compared to the camel's relationship with his or her own self. The problem is never the camel's mate. It's not even the camel's actions. The problem driving the whole equation is the camel's core beliefs and binary gates. Everything flows from these. The relationship camel only ceases to be a camel when she has the courage to change her core beliefs and thereby begin the process of living deliberately and in the end much more happily. Journaling recommendation 1. In which relationships in your life are you investing way more than you are getting? 2. More importantly, are you beginning to understand the correlation between core beliefs and the shape of the world around you, the world you've created? Are you beginning to understand that even the slightest shift in core beliefs is a shift in the tectonic plates underneath your life, creating earthquakes of change in your life, principles, and eventually your actions? 3. Which relationships have you been sucked back into by shiny baubles and grand promises? How long did it take for these changes to peter out? What do you think caused them to peter out? 4. From whom did you learn how to be a relationship camel? The person who taught you how to live with a taker and make a taker happy. And who was the taker in that camel's life? The taker you yourself likely still fear critique from and long for praise from. 5. How bad does the pain of deadness have to get before you're finally ready to let go, become unwound from the emotions of others, and finally live not just freer, but lighter? When do you finally realize the futility of happiness by proxy? And 6. How can I love you for who you really are if you won't show me who you really are? Are you still hiding behind your walls? Has your pain gotten bad enough that you're willing to risk and open up?
How